In 1971, the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act declared America's wild horses a living symbol, protecting them from capture and death. The act gave authority over the horses to the BLM and Forest Service, stipulating that excess horses shall be culled from the herd and sold for adoption. In the 30 years that followed, however, more horses were taken from the wild than could be adopted. As a result, the facilities became overrun and financially troubled. But in 2004, a radical solution to the wild horse problem was proposed. Late in the legislative session, a rider was quietly attached to the U.S. 2005 Appropriations Bill by Senator Conrad Burns. The rider authorized the BLM to sell, without limitation, wild horses and burros that are over 10 years old, or have been passed over for adoption at least 3 times. Activists fought for the bill's retraction, and finally in 2007, the last of the American slaughterhouses were closed. But the horses remain at risk. Every day, Mustangs are trucked across America's borders for slaughter in Canada and Mexico. Three decades after the Mustang gained protection from slaughter, the management of the wild horse remains as complex as the public land it inhabits. What can be done to manage an icon of freedom? Should the wild spaces of the world be left without interference, or will the species' unchecked growth lead to its own destruction?
The Great Basin, this area here, was central to the development of the equestrian culture among American Indians. My people, the Ute Indians, acquired the horse from the Spanish right around the year 1630, right around that period there. And most historians believe that the horse was traded out through to the plains and among the Comanche and Kiowa, the Ute, Comanche, Kiowa, then on up to the Omahas, on up to the Lakotas and Cheyennes, Arapaho, the tribes up in Wyoming, further north.
The wild horse may be a symbol of the West, but it is not native to the terrain. Brought to the Americas by the Spanish in the 1500s, it is a feral species, an animal that escaped domestication and populated the new land. But before Spaniards, before Ute and Navajo, before even bison and antelope wandered the American plains, a short, 3-toed ancestor of the modern horse roamed the prehistoric continent. How this ancient horse became extinct in the Americas is unknown, but before it did so, it traveled across the land bridge and spread throughout the world. To the Russian steppes, where the stout, hardy Barb carried the Mongols across to Asia. To Europe, where the immense, sturdy draft horse supported the knights in their heavy armor. To the Middle East, where the light, swift Arabian became the pride of the desert. Across the world, the horse became the vehicle of empires, expanding the territory and transforming the people. The fine steeds of the conquistadors, named Mestengos, would be no exception.
It transformed our people. Our people were some of the first to utilize the horse. We went from basically having to walk to acquire everything to we became raiders. We raided other tribes. We traveled further for big game.
The animal that changed the territory also shaped its spirit. The figure of man at home under the stars, free to move and go as he pleased, forever became the romantic image of the American West. But this freedom could not last. As more people required land for settlement, the West became gradually fenced. Once over 1 million wild horses roamed the United States. Now that number has dropped to below 30,000. With the invention of the tractor, the horse became obsolete. Programs were begun to strip American Indians of their worthless ponies, and conflicts arose as Mustangs competed with livestock and big game for precious resources.
Some of the forestry and Bureau of Land specialists, conservation people are saying that the horse are consuming too much of the vegetation for the bigger game, such as elk and deer, and so it's creating a shortage in the food sources.
Forrest Kutch is no stranger to conflict, but he sees the Mustang as a unique opportunity. Kutch is co-founder of RAIN, an organization that seeks to start charter schools run by and for American Indians. As part of the curriculum, he would like to start an equestrian program that would reconnect the students with their past.
We believe that a strong alliance can be established between American Indian people who have lost their culture, which is part of the Mustangs' existence. By bringing those two together, we think that we can create a wonderful partnership that will preserve our culture as well as the Mustangs. We're going to partner with some folks who have expertise in the area of training Mustangs, grooming them, taking care of them. Along with that will come agricultural-related training in terms of how to maintain pastures, how to put up alfalfa and grass hay, grain, whatever's necessary to keep the Mustangs healthy and retain a livelihood for that culture.
If Kutch is to be successful, he will indeed need the help of experts. Though rewarding, gentling a Mustang is an arduous task. At this government facility, the process begins by conditioning the horse to accept a rider on its back. For decades, the BLM and Forest Service have administered the Wild Horse and Burro Adoption Program. For just $125, a buyer may adopt a horse or burro. After 1 year, the owner gains title to the horse. But the program has many detractors.
If I go down to Kane County in Utah and I say the W word, wilderness, I might be run out of town. If I go down there and say ATV, all-terrain vehicle, they're going to buy me breakfast. So we become a polarized system of government, and we need to find some way that the person who values the wild horse for its iconic image and value feels that that image will be protected into the future.
In fiscal year 2007, the BLM spent over $38 million on its wild horse and burro program. $21 million of that, over half the budget, was spent on holding facilities. On one side of the issue, critics argue that taxpayer money is being wasted on an inefficient and needless program. A horse may live for 40 years in captivity, and during that time it must be fed, watered, and kept in good condition. On the other side, activists claim the BLM intentionally rounds up more horses than are necessary. The American Horse Defense Fund claims there are roughly 13,000 horses and burros in the wild, compared with 33,000 held in BLM pens. As former director of the BLM, Pat Shea is well acquainted with the controversy.
But it's almost like religion. You know, my sense of wild is different than your sense of wild. And if you start to encroach on my wild, I'm going to be offended. And what happens with the wild horse advocates is if they perceive to be somebody who is less than sympathetic, indeed maybe proactive in doing something that's not considered good for the wild horses, then it's back to the battlefield, and we're going to do battle with you.
The battlefield Pat Shea refers to has its roots in the Wild West, but came to a head in the 1960s. No longer a beast of burden or a tool of war, the horse returned to its original function for man, a source of meat. The practice of selling horses for slaughter was not new, but the cruelty exhibited by some Mustangers in the 1960s caught national attention. Velma Johnson, the wife of a rancher, was traveling home when she noticed the trailer ahead of her leaking blood. She followed the trailer to its destination, where she discovered injured horses crammed together, standing on the body of a crushed foal. This incident sparked the largest letter-writing campaign in our nation's history, and eventually led to the unanimous passage of the 1971 Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act. But the success of the act has been mixed. For decades, accusations of unsound science and outright abuse have plagued the BLM. In a 1990 report, the U.S. General Accounting Office asserted, "The BLM could not provide us with data to demonstrate where wild horse removals have materially improved the specific areas from which they have been removed." The GOA added, "Wild horse behavior patterns make the horses somewhat less damaging than cattle to especially vulnerable range areas." Yet the BLM insists it is taking many measures to stop the abuses. In 1996, the BLM conducted almost 3,000 spot checks and responded to over 200 complaints of neglect. These checks led to the repossession of 51 horses and the reassignment of 317 to other adopters. Pat Shea explains how the horses lose in the long run, despite the best efforts of dedicated employees.
What happens, in my judgment, is government doesn't have tourism, in the BLM at least, as a number one priority, and you need somebody who wakes up in the morning and goes to bed at night who says to herself, I want to make sure that we're doing the most to protect these horses and to manage this land in a way that complements those sanctuaries. I do think there is an opportunity to have a government agency, BLM, with government jurisdiction over it to protect poaching and other abuses of wild horses, but that on the management side, the foundation with private financing would take a more active role of maintaining the herds in a way which was complementary to the carrying capacity of the lands where they're located.
Though frustrated with his former agency, Shea understands the challenges facing the BLM. As part of its mandate, the BLM is charged with balancing commercial, recreational, and wildlife interests all in the same land. The Wild Horse program is only a tiny piece of this overall charge, and the BLM itself is only a single entity inside the overall government system.
But again, you have to understand the pressure. I was one time, when I was in BLM up in New York City for some meetings, and a person who worked for Andrew Cuomo, who's now the Attorney General of New York and at the time was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, say to me, how can you possibly ask for more money to feed wild horses when we have human children who are being underfed in parts of the United States? So if you're a member of Congress and a member of the Appropriations Committee and you're balancing, do I feed children or do I feed wild horses, I think the answer is going to be we take care of children first.
As long as the horses are under government jurisdiction, they are subject to the financial and political climate of the day. In July 2008, the BLM announced a proposal to euthanize the 33,000 animals currently held in its facilities.
For those of you who've been contemplating whether to ride in the team penny, cattle sorting in the cattle sorting class, we need one more person to finish it, to make a complete team. So if you are contemplating whether to ride in the cattle sorting, come on in and
The animals at this horse show were once wild. Now they are a testament to the potential of the adoption program. But not all of the BLM's horses are suitable for this type of work. Some are too old, too plain, or too wild. This is Medicine Hat. He has twice been adopted and twice returned. His markings make him highly desirable, but he is not a rideable horse. Under the Burns Amendment, he will soon be eligible for auction to any buyer, including the slaughterhouse.
And I don't want to criticize the government, but whatever they try to protect generally turns out to be a bad deal.
Terry Sullivan is not a rancher or an activist. He grew up on a Nevada range and still remembers the conditions before the 1971 Act.
What happened, in my opinion, was after Thelma Johnson, who did a wonderful job getting laws passed and stuff, they just went too far with it and they started protecting them, totally protecting them. And it meant that then that the ranchers who used to gather them up and keep them thinned out couldn't do that anymore. They also couldn't turn their stallions out, which most of them did in the winter, which kept the Mustangs pretty well upgraded. Now you get an awful lot of inbreeding, and the more inbreeding you get, the worse they get. They get bigger heads, they get smaller bodies, and we call them broomtails because their tails get so long. And there's just, they're just too close-knit. They don't get spread out the way they used to, because there's no disturbance at all.
A horse lover, Terry has adopted and gentled a Mustang for his granddaughter. But he is also practical. He shares the opinion of many that if the horses are going to die, they should at least provide food for others.
They would go and take a spring and they would paw it out, make clear running water for everybody. Now what they do is there's so many of them and so little water, is the stallions will guard the water hole. And the foals and the mares will do their best to get a drink. Mostly what they do is drink mud. Their bellies fill with mud, and they again die a horrible, horrible death. It only takes one bad winter. They suffer all winter long. I mean, it's very, very difficult for them out there. They eat the bark off sagebrush. I mean, there's just not enough out there for them. It's a serious problem. Something has to be done if anybody's interested in them not suffering. I mean, you don't have to do anything, but they're going to suffer more and more and more. And I think it's criminal. I hate what we do to them. I hate the fact that we love them to death.
The reality is that death, whether in the wild or in a slaughterhouse, is seldom humane. The New York Times reports that in 1991, the Air Force at the Nellis, Nevada testing site trucked in 10,000 gallons of water per day for the wild horses on its range. Though these cases exist, activists argue that the majority of the horses are healthy. Still, cases like these lend support to the BLM roundup policy.
Now, of course, you know that they're not indigenous to this country, and some people will tell you that they are, but they're not. And therefore they have no natural enemies, notwithstanding us. And we need to be their enemy at times.
Horse meat is no longer used for dog food in the United States. A delicacy in Europe and Japan, some cuts of meat sell for $26 or more. But in the U.S., the practice is so distasteful that it is illegal in most states. Chapter 149 of the Texas Agricultural Code prohibits the transport, sale, or possession of horse meat. Yet 2 of the 3 horse slaughterhouses were located in Texas. The slaughterhouses filed an injunction with the federal court in 2003. The slaughterhouses were allowed to operate while the federal court simply failed to rule. Finally, in 2007, all 3 American plants were shut down. But this created a new problem, both for wild and domestic horses.
They get sold to unscrupulous people who take them to Mexico for slaughter. And again, I've never seen it happen down there, but I've heard that it's pretty inhumane what happens to them down there.
Recent investigations by the Humane Society of the United States reveal the use of the puntilla knife in Mexican slaughterhouses. The horse is stabbed in the neck until the spinal cord is severed. The act paralyzes the horse, but the animal remains conscious during slaughter. Transport of the animals to slaughter is equally traumatic. Trucked for thousands of miles without food or water, they are packed together in cars intended for cattle. The horses must stand with their necks bent for days at a time. Many arrive at slaughter injured, sick, or dead. In Canada, horses are processed as they once were in the United States. The conditions in these plants have also come into question, especially the use of the captive bolt gun. In his testimony before the U.S. House of Representatives, Dr. Nicholas Dodman describes the use of this device. The captive bolt gun is a mechanical method by which animals are supposed to be rendered immediately unconscious, not killed, through a quick blow to the brain by a metal bolt. In order for the bolt gun to be effective, a worker must hit a brain the size of an orange inside the horse's skull. Dr. Dodman explains the problem with the application of this device. The horse is often panicked, its head is unrestrained, and the person administering the captive bolt is a low-paid worker who is expected to move the horses through the kill line at a high speed. As long as the borders remain open, there is still the potential for America's wild horses to end up in Canadian and Mexican slaughterhouses. But the fate of Medicine Hat will be much happier. Medicine Hat was adopted by a sanctuary where he will live out his natural life. The horses on this sanctuary are neither tame nor wild. Well fed and cared for, they will be gentled and used in various programs. Their health and breeding habits will be closely managed. Many of these small sanctuaries exist across America, but some have grown big enough to develop a new approach to management. In the wild, horses live in a family band. The herd consists of a single stallion and his harem of mares. A lead mare travels at the head of the herd, watching for danger and choosing the path. The stallion travels behind, jealously guarding his harem from other males. When his offspring reach maturity, the stallion will force them from the herd. Some sanctuaries are making every effort to rescue entire herd families, keeping the band intact. New approaches to birth control are also being utilized. Each year, a reversible non-hormonal birth control, PZP, can be administered to the mares. The mares still cycle, but are not fertile. Vasectomizing the stallions has also been proposed. In this way, the herd structure remains intact, but the number of offspring stays manageable. A land trust for the horses is also under development. The trust would provide acreage for 1,000 horses to live naturally for generations. However, in addition to cattle, the horses must now compete with the increasing needs of energy and housing. Whether the trust will be funded in time to preserve the horses remains to be seen. According to the AHDF, the BLM now faces 3 options to handle its budgetary crisis. The federal government can give the BLM the necessary funds to maintain the horse program. The BLM can grant instant title to adopters, including slaughterhouses. Or they can euthanize the 33,000 animals in their facilities. The BLM is expected to reach a conclusion in September 2008. In a letter to the BLM regarding the proposed euthanasia, The chairman of the Committee for Natural Resources has written the following. You must be aware that the BLM's inability to administer the budget of the Wild Horses and Burros program with any trace of fiscal accountability is a long-standing concern and must not be used as a death sentence upon these celebrated symbols of the American West.